John Metcalf was senior editor at Porcupine's Quill until 2005 and is now fiction editor at Biblioasis. He is the author of more than a dozen works of fiction and non-fiction, including Standing Stones, Selected Stories, Adult Entertainment, Going Down Slow, and Kicking Against the Pricks. He lives in Ottawa with his wife, Myrna, who is in the room with us as we speak. Welcome to the Bibliophile. Today's program is going to be devoted to negative reviewing. I'd like to, first of all, with you, define reviewing in general and start by suggesting that there are sort of four components: description, comparison, argument, and evaluation. Do you say that pretty well covers it?
I would think so, yeah.
And so as long as a review does a good job in all of those areas, it can make a convincing argument in favor or against a particular book.
Mm-hmm.
Where negative reviewing shows up is when the critic goes beyond those four components and adds insult and invective. And I just wonder why a reviewer would resort to that.
Well, I would think that the last component that you mentioned, evaluation, is one that, if it evaluates, has to say this book is not as good as either a run of books on a similar topic, or if it's a book on a particular concept or something like that, this book is not as good as the book that came out 3 years ago by so-and-so, and we compare and contrast. And we might also, when you say about invective or whatever, I mean, there are some books, in fact, very large numbers of books, just so ill written that they need castigation, that we need somebody to say, this writer cannot write English. Now, the literature, the culture needs critics who will tell the truth. Now, there was a very famous Canadian critic who was largely a theatre critic. What was his name, Myrna?
Nathan Cohen.
Nathan Cohen, who routinely took to pieces theatrical productions in Toronto. And he said, this actor wouldn't survive a weekend in London, and should be chucked off the stage, This play is so ill-written compared with what is happening in New York and London, and etc., etc. I don't find that a negative activity at all. I think it's a very positive activity, and it must be said if we are going to survive as a literary culture. For example, I have said in print, and would not withdraw from and would repeat, Vassanji, for example, who has won the Giller Prize twice and has been shortlisted, I think, for a third time, cannot write English. And everything that he writes reads as if it's ESL, or a translation into English from some obscure language, which it doubtless is, and which isn't his fault. But, the Giller jury cited his book as splendid, marvellous prose in its citation when they gave him that award. Now, if we live in a society where we can have Alice Munro here, and we can have Vassanji here, and they both win the same awards, then an illiterate public is going to say they must be the same thing, which is an idea so laughable, if you can read, that somebody should stand up and say, what bloody rubbish are we listening to? Now, you see, I don't see that as hostile or negative or anything of the kind. I think it's merely common sense.
What you're doing is comparing the work of Alice Munro, the gold standard, with work that is being unjustly compared to it.
I'm comparing it with work which wins the same award.
Yes.
So that our society, Canadian society, which is a totally illiterate one. I mean, even our Department of Heritage is unable to spell the names of Margaret Lawrence, you know, and people like this, and when they do press releases and things. I mean, you know, we're run by an illiterate bureaucracy. And the whole idea of a country which administers its literature with a bureaucracy is deeply comic. You know, I mean, we live in a society that has a competition called Canada Reads. I mean, how puerile can you possibly get? Mm-hmm. So, to say to, you know, this illiterate society, well, this person and this person, they both won the same prizes, therefore they're the same thing. You know, a book is a book is a book. Somebody has got to stand up and say, this is gibberish.
Well, somebody's got to stand up and compare the two and then come up with reasoned arguments to...
Oh, does one have to come up with reasoned argument? For Christ's sake, you read one paragraph of Vassanji and you know that you are not dealing with a person who can handle the English language. I mean, there's no debate, there's no question, it's not my opinion. Mm-hmm. It's the opinion of anybody who is literate, who can read.
Yes, but he's won these awards.
Well, fuck that. I mean, you know, all kinds of people have won weird awards. You know, I mean, I could probably read you a list of the last 10 winners of the Nobel Prize and you wouldn't have heard of a single one of them.
Well, that's because they're Swedish and they don't understand.
No, it's not. They might be from all over the world, you know.
No, but the jury.
The jury, yeah. But I mean, no. I mean, you know, you can either read or you can't read. And I mean, to defend, you know, for you to say to me, you have to sort of say, here's a paragraph of Alice Munro and here's a paragraph of Vassanji, and you have to show how one is not the equivalent of the other, or, you know, no. I mean, these are games I'm not prepared to play. I mean, you either know this or you don't know it. And if you don't know it, I can never teach you because you'll never understand.
You're obviously emotionally engaged with this. Is that the point where you swear or you feel like you need to express that you're disgust in a way beyond just rational argumentation? Is that the justifying point?
Let's put it this way. As far as I'm concerned, and I have devoted 40 years of my life to this and more, literature is one of the most important things in the world, and I'm not prepared to play games with semi-literate people who claim that my assertion that Vassanji cannot write English is untrue. I mean, I simply say, I'm not interested. Go away. You know, shut up. Piss off. And I say that out of the strength of the fact that I read more manuscripts than you could imagine in a year. And over 40 years, I cannot imagine how many manuscripts I've read. I edit the Oberon Press's Best Canadian Stories. I handle this stuff every single day of my life, and I write. And I know what the best is. So it's very simple. And Vassanji isn't it. Alice Munro is.
Let's say there are two authors whose qualities aren't quite so mismatched. Given that situation, the critic would be well served to provide rational argument, to provide some sort of grounding for their evaluation.
Well, yes, I mean, if I were writing a review.
So in terms of where insult would come in, or the use of invective, it would be where the disparity, let's say, between two works is so great, you just there's a level of disgust that
Yes,
requires the use of forceful language.
Absolutely. I mean, I think some people are so atrocious as writers that they deserve invective, and indeed more than invective. I mean,
what, lynching?
Well, public scourging might be a possibility. I mean, I can remember when I was reading Marie MacDonald's Fall on Your Knees. It took me almost 2 bottles of scotch to get through that book. I have rarely read anything so badly written, yet it was heralded all over the world. I mean, not just in Canada. I mean, Canada's bad enough, but I mean, it was heralded all over the place as absolutely phenomenal, terrific, wonderful book. And it sold, God knows, truckfuls of copies. I mean, a more ridiculous book you would have to go a long, long way to find. I mean, it was so grossly written and so grossly thought and felt that merely saying so was not enough. One had to go after it and point out to people what happens in this book. And you tell them what happens in this book.
The descriptive.
It's preposterous. The things that go on in it, I mean, and then you say, can normal, serious people regard this book seriously? And the answer is yes, they can. It was voted by the Globe and Mail as one of the most esteemed books of the year. It won God knows how many awards. Well, I mean, the answer to this is to attack it with savagery, which I did, and with great pleasure too.
Isn't that what Virginia Woolf said about reviewing? One of the things that gave her the most delight was the fact that she could be nasty.
I mean, one doesn't go out looking for it, but I mean, look at it from the other way round. This person who did this thing is doing it to me, right? Why
so
should I sit still?
You feel an insult that you want to return.
Oh, I felt that it was a direct attack on everything I value, yes. I mean, a book about Gaelic-speaking Lebanese in Cape Breton in the 19th century. I mean, do join the world,
So you're angry. I've just picked up a copy of A Lover's Quarrel, Essays and Reviews by Carmine Darnino, which you, in fact,
read it for the press.
There's something he has to say about anger. Would you say that that's sort of a determining factor as to whether or not you would hit back with savagery, is the degree of anger that you experience in reading?
The degree of anger to which I have been provoked. Remember, this is not a one-way thing. This is a two-way thing. Somebody else starts it and I'll finish it.
So the author has wasted your time?
And offended me deeply.
Because of your love of literature, but your desire to laud what is truly great.
Yes.
Anything else?
Well, I mean, if you were reverting to Marie MacDonald and Fall on Your Knees, I mean, I'd say that it was almost an assault on every value that I hold sacred. I mean, she simply cannot write. I mean, the book was just a sort of a horror show full of cliches and nonsense. And
have you met her?
No.
When a critic achieves a certain notoriety, he or she starts to rub shoulders with the people that he or she reviews. There's been suggestion that tempers their criticisms. Would you say that's accurate?
Well, I mean, I know some professional critics who will not go to literary parties and such like because they don't want to meet people that they're going to be reviewing. It would make no difference to me because I'm interested only in the book. If somebody I knew and liked wrote a lousy book, I would probably tend not to review it, but if I did, I would review it honestly. I mean, the whole question about honesty in this is that what one is serving is larger and more important than oneself. And if you are serving a culture or a literature, then you would regretfully have to say, this book is by a friend of mine and he usually writes very good books, but this book is not good.
Now, doesn't that get to the nub of a lot of criticism in this country, though? It boils down to personal slight.
No, I think the nub of criticism in this country is that what little criticism there is written to assuage the feelings of newspaper proprietors, and that what is published as criticism is largely laudatory nonsense written by people who know that the newspapers are expecting them to be, generally speaking, respectful and to serve the purpose of the newspapers printing the review in the first place, which is to get advertising money from the publisher who published the book.
Let's say in the case of a negative review, though.
There are very few. How many can you think of?
Lots of yours.
Yeah.
Are they motivated by personal slight or not at all?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And actually, there aren't lots of mine because I don't write any reviews. In fact, the review that I did in C&Q, I think, was the first one that I've probably written in 15 or 20 years.
I guess I'm basing that statement on the books of criticism that I've read of yours.
Oh, well, I mean, those are books.
Yeah.
They're not newspaper reviews.
Here's the quote. I'm quoting from Carmine Starnino's A Lover's Quarrel. Much of the writing in A Lover's Quarrel had its origins in anger. Anger at the unmerited neglect of a poet, anger at the overblown fanfare attending a book, and anger at the circumstances conspiring to ensure that poems in this country continue to be crudely read.
Mm.
The degree of anger would determine the degree of insult and invective.
What is Carmen being angry about? He's not being angry about Joe Smith, and he's not being angry with Joe Smith particularly. He's got much more important fish to fry. What he's angry about, and anger seems to me absolutely the correct response, he is angry about the inflated reputations of some alleged poets. He's angry about the low level of appreciation of poetry in the country. He's angry about the inabilities of most academics to understand anything at all about poetry. He's angry about literature in general and its place in the modern world. And this seems to me to be utterly commendable. This is precisely the way I feel. And precisely the motivations which, would provide me with feelings of anger. When I read all the commendations of novelists in the Globe and Mail and the National Post and, Quill and Quire and, wherever. And I know, usually without having read a word of them, that it's all nonsense. It's all commerce. And the evaluation, the fourth part of your division of the responsibilities of a review, evaluation doesn't take place. I forget who it was, Doubleday or, one of those wretched companies owned by Random House, came up with this slogan that they put on all their advertising that said, the new face of fiction, and all these bloody awful books that appeared one after another, all of them absolutely unreadable. And anybody with any literary sense whatsoever knows that a really important book of fiction comes maybe once every 10 years out of England or the United States and not here, because we don't have an audience hard enough to exact that great book, if you understand what I mean.
Well, the fact that again is what you're doing. You're being more than hard, let's say. Are you compensating for the lack of hardness that exists in Canada?
Well, yeah, it's one's duty. I mean, the Canadian critic's duty is to be vitally aware of what is happening in England and what is happening in the United States, and to compare Canadian output with the best from those two countries. And of course, when you do that, the result is painful. I mean, we're not even on the same planet. And, you can't get Toronto to understand that. They have their own little machinery. They have, Quill and Choir, and they have M&S, and they have the Giller Prize, and they have Harbourfront, and they have this and that. And
all of those sort of apparati are to laud
Canadian product.
Right,
which is largely of a commercial nature in the first place, and is undistinguished, and when compared with what is
cheerleading or boosterism.
Yes, it's all the same bloody story since the 1920s in this country. It's ludicrous, it always has been ludicrous, and it looks as though it's getting worse, if anything. I mean, for example, if I looked back over the last, say, 15 years, and I was thinking of marvellous books, things that have meant, in literary terms, like a huge amount to me, like Naipaul's In a Free State, or Graham Swift's Waterlands, or Malcolm Bradbury's The History Man, or Eating People is Wrong. These are books that stand like beacons for me. Or a lot of Amis as well, Kingsley, not Martin. Then I think, is there a Canadian novel that meant anything to me at all in the last 30 years? And the only one, to be absolutely honest, that meant anything to me at all was St. Urban's Horseman by Mordecai Richel. That is the only book that it seems to me Canada has produced which is in contention in world literature.
And you can pick it up for about $30.
Yeah, or less. Exactly. Nobody wants to buy it or read it.
Okay, so we've looked at personal slight as a motivation.
Mm.
We've looked at anger at boosterism. Not what justifies the use of insult, but where is it appropriate and where is it not appropriate?
One doesn't want to take a sledgehammer to crack a hazelnut. I mean, there's no point in that. I mean, that would be like my having a personal go at Vassanji. I can't be bothered. I mean, all I can say is read this, which is what I did in Shut Up, Explained. I say, read this paragraph. If you think that's English, then you've got problems. That doesn't seem to me insulting or anything of the kind.
But when is the use of insult appropriate?
Well, it's appropriate when you feel that the entire literary carnival has gathered together to celebrate something ridiculous. And then I think insult is terrific, and furthermore it's fun. Beyond that, it can be so memorable.
Fun to write, fun to read.
Right. And it also fulfills a function, because in a memorable way, you are saying to a readership, I am responding to this thing that I'm talking about with contempt or with disgust, and maybe you should too. And I mean, they're glorious when you pull them off. I once said about Rudy Weed that you can't explain the idea of elegance to somebody if they don't understand. And I said it would be like telling a joke to Rudy Weed. Right? Now, that's very rude, and in your terms in which you're talking, probably very savage. But it also encapsulates something.
Truth and humour or wit.
He's a Mennonite, ponderously lacking in humour. I don't think much of a writer. although he has won the Governor-General Award 2 or 3 times. But no, good stuff. I like warfare. I approve of warfare. I liked John Sparrow, the English academic, who said of F.R. Leavis, if he'd wash his neck, I'd wring it. I'm all for this stuff. I think it's fine, you know. Canadians are very wishy-washy. You will find people that would line up to say, oh, it isn't really very nice to say this. Sure as hell it isn't very nice. It wasn't intended to be, you know.
There's a couple of things. It's going to cause, quote, hurt, unquote.
Oh, sure.
If it's good and if it's accurate.
Yeah,
yes.
it's going to cause a great deal of hurt, which is the point.
The point, though, I would think, would be to raise the bar, ultimately.
That is exactly what it's doing. Because if you have gone along all your life thinking, Rudy Weave, oh yes, he writes those books and he's won 3 Governor-General's Awards, he must be one of the most important writers in the country, and then I come along and make this smart-ass crack, it might just make you think, maybe I ought to go and have a look at this and see what's going on.
Yeah.
Which is the function of what it should be doing.
Mm-hmm. I'd suggest that the other thing that it does is it really pisses off the person that you hurt.
Oh, yeah.
And one would hope inspire them to respond in kind.
Well, I mean, if you dish it out, you should also take it. Sure, yeah. I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, I'm all for warfare. I mean, I think warfare's a good thing, you know.
You stand out in the Canadian literary world because of this, but your writing, if I may say so, is among the most entertaining that exists in the country.
I only stand out because...
You wouldn't stand out in England or
maybe
in the States.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. That's the whole point. I mean, you should see the things that go on in the TLS, you know, and the warfare in London about, you know, between writers and...
Wonderfully entertaining.
Well, of course, yeah. And the thing is that we ought to be in the grown-up world, which is not a world where people say, now children play together nicely, get on with each other. I mean, have you any idea of the warfare that surrounds Martin Amis?
Oh, God, yeah.
I mean, they're just at each other's throats all the time in England, and I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. I mean, I do see something wrong with the utter blandness of Canadian literary life. The 2 figures that really sum up Canadian literary life for me are Timothy Finlay, whom I had always thought pretty untalented and deeply florid in style and very often hysterical, and Robertson Davies, like one of the biggest windbags and frauds that I've ever come across. And they are revered in Canadian Literary Society. Everybody goes and says, oh, how wonderful Tiff was, and what a great artist Robertson Davies was. You know. I always remember writing a review, actually, of the Rebel Angels, which I thought was one of the worst books that I had read in many a long year. I can't remember how many bottles of scotch it took to get me through that one.
More than
Marie MacDonald? Yeah, I think so, actually.
It's a slimmer book.
But it's tedious going. But it's a dreadful book. And, you know, every character in it, male, female, young, old, all speak in the same voice. You know, Robertson Davies' voice. And the whole thing is silly, you know. Let me finish.
Sure.
I wrote about him that I thought it was an atrociously bad book. And I was actually ticked off in the Toronto Star by Beverly Slocum, who was a sort of a sycophant of Robertson Davies, who described my review of him as churlish. I mean, dear God. And, you know, the Canadian reviewers and, you know, poetasters in Toronto sort of said, Robertson Davies, oh yes, well, Anthony, what's his name? Burgess thinks he's a great novelist, you know. And I said, has anyone ever considered that Anthony Burgess might be an even worse novelist than Robertson Davies. But
well, has anyone ever considered that Anthony Burgess put that list together as a joke? He did, apparently.
Well, I mean, it's. I don't know. It seems to me really that any evaluative approach to literature would lead to
an improved situation. It would make us all much more astringent, and we wouldn't blunder around proclaiming each new, large Random House publishing event, an epoch-making, discovery, and etc., etc. And we could.
But it's emptying out the value. It's devaluing the word of
with every
superlatives.
book that comes out, it becomes a more and more hollow occupation. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we all ought to go back and think a little bit more about. People like I'm reading just at the moment, Nabokov or somebody like this. I mean, if you're talking about quality and style and importance, then you have to say, Nabokov was probably more important than anything in the last 50 years.
Yes. I think that's the thing, isn't it? So you're almost treated like a traitor if you say simply, as you've said, that there aren't that many great works out there. They come along, if you're lucky, once every 10 years.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, what do? You don't want to shit on everything and demoralize everyone.
No, I think
you want to pick and I suppose you want to pick and choose and some sort of balance.
But I mean, let me say this: I don't shit on everything. I am very, very active in publishing the people that I consider the best writers in this country. The country doesn't want to know, and they won't read them, but I do. And I not only read them, but I edit them and I publish them. And the list is extraordinary. Annabel Lyon, Caroline Addison, K.D. Miller, Steve Heighton, Russell Smith. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So, I mean, don't say that I spend all my time being negatively critical. I don't. I'm critical of a great deal of crap. And I regard most of everything that comes out of Random House and M&S and, whatever else they own up there. I'm critical of that because it's not literature, it's commerce. I mean, they're just producing fodder for entertainment. It's not anything to do with. That's what's wrong with Canada, that we have been seduced through ignorance and stupidity into believing that what in any other country would be regarded as commercial entertainment is in fact literature. And the actual literature, which is produced by the small presses in the country, or a very small handful of them, is ignored entirely. It's unknown because it's not promoted, it's not commercially exploitable, and it's hard, it's difficult, it's demanding stuff to read. I was shocked by Quill and Quire that in an editorial piece said that the attitude of the publishing industry, i.e. Toronto, to the short story was that it was all very well, but it was a bit like the NDP, probably worthy in some vague kind of way, but then these are their exact words, but not quite grown up. Now, this can be said by the organ of Canadian publishing about the form, which is the quintessential form in the 20th century of modernism, and which has seen the work of the greatest writers of the 20th century.
Then it's the most challenging.
And it's the most beautiful and the most challenging. But I mean, you see, the attitude that we've got towards it is just totally Philistine. We don't understand anything. I mean, we think Fall on Your Knees is important because it sells 1 million copies, you know.
So let's just wind up by, again, looking at the justification for the use of invective and insult. Not necessarily talking about your own personal experiences, but just there's a justification for its use, and it results in hostility. And in a small pond like Canada, it's difficult to say something without it having repercussion.
Oh, certainly, yeah. But what have you got against hostility?
I don't have anything. I find it the most entertaining writing around. I wish there was more of it.
It's an art form. Insult. It's a wonderful thing.
It's witticisms.
Yes.
I'm just trying to get to the nub of why ad hominem attacks would be attached to the 4 components that we started off the conversation with. Why aren't those 4 good enough? That's, I guess, the question.
Well, because certain things outrage one. I mean, you know, it's all very well going around pretending that one is totally Augustan, you know, in one's judgment. And I mean, certain books get up my nose, and, you know, I will do dirt to the people who did them to me, and it will give me pleasure.
Thanks for giving us so much pleasure.
A pleasure.
I've been speaking with John Metcalf, was senior editor at Porcupine's Quill until 2005. He's now the fiction editor at Biblioasis. His most recent book is called Shut Up, He Explained, a literary memoir, volume 2, following from
An Aesthetic Underground, a literary memoir.
That's volume 1.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Pleasure.